Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, here today with another review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at one of the most kind of iconic historic stories from probably all of comic book history. Certainly it was a huge deal when it came out originally back in the 90s. I'm talking obviously about the death and return of Superman, collected here in this pretty awesome looking and massive omnibus edition from a couple of years ago, DC released. Yeah, a bit of an odd one, the Death and Return of Superman Omnibus, because it's had 3 printings, this being the 3rd and so far most recent. Each version of the book has been completely different, has looked totally different to the previous versions. The first one, I think, wasn't even oversized. The second one looked a lot different to this one. I think this is the best looking version of the Omnibus so far. And there will be a reprint, so this book is getting reprinted next year, I think May 2022, roughly. So... And as far as I'm aware, it's going to be this version of the book that's being reprinted, so it should look exactly like this. If there are any differences, apologies, I'm not aware of any. Certainly what I've seen online from solicits looks to match up with this one. We'll see, obviously. But with that in mind, really, I suppose there's as much reason as any to do this today. I wanted to take a look at this book, give an overview of it, maybe help out anybody who's thinking about buying that reprint next year. Or maybe if you're just interested in this event and hearing some more about it. Hopefully I can provide something of interest here as we take a look through this, and I will discuss the event in some detail. So I'll just say spoiler warning now, spoiler alert. I'm going to cover a lot of the key points of this story, certainly not everything. This is a huge book. We're talking about nearly 1,400 pages, I think just underneath that. So yeah, massive book, huge omnibus. A lot going on, so I definitely won't be covering every point of the story, but I'll cover some things for sure. So let's take a look at this cover. Now you hopefully can tell that it's a mostly matte cover, but the Superman logo and the cape, the lettering, the symbols, that's all glossy. So it's like glossy finish on matte black cover. Looks really nice, really suits the tone of what this story is. I think it's a great design. Actually one of my favourite dust jackets probably from any omnibus. I think this is just really well done. The back, you can see, if we just take a look at it a little bit closer, you get a blurb down there and all the content. So that's what you get in this book. And as I say, from what I've seen online, that seems to match up pretty closely with what's going to be in the reprint. Well, time will tell, I suppose, if it's exactly the same. But yeah, so we'll have a look. So the book is huge. It's not easy to lift this thing. Bit of a test of strength. The design, you can see there's this wraparound going on of the big fight that goes on between Superman and Doomsday. I'm getting smacked in the face there. Very nice. Yeah, so let's have a look inside. I really like these bookend pages. They've got these kind of newspaper clippings that show the news stories, the in-world news stories, focusing on Superman's death. I suppose it's no spoiler really, given the title of the book, to say that Superman is going to die and return in this story. So let's just take that for granted. So you get your table of contents here. One of those things I like to point out when there is one, because sometimes there isn't. And then sometimes there is one, but there's no page numbers. And I don't know, you never know with DC. In particular, DC are pretty inconsistent with it. But here, everything looks pretty good. You get your contents, got your page numbers. It all starts off here with this little prologue, little excerpt of an issue where Doomsday's fist is punching out of the container that's keeping him in there. And you get going properly with Superman, the Man of Steel, issue 18. So, yeah. The big bad guy here then, the big threat initially, is this new character that was introduced for this story, this huge hulking creature called Doomsday. That's what he gets dubbed anyway in the story. And with this story, I can never help but compare it to the Nightfall saga that happened over with Batman around the same sort of time as this, just after this, I think. Because it's really very similar. In both situations, you had a new villain that was introduced specifically to ultimately defeat the hero. Over in Nightfall it was Bane, here it's Doomsday. And I can't help but compare it because, in my opinion, I just think that Bane was a much better kind of version of that type of character than Doomsday is. Because you really don't learn anything about Doomsday in this story. I know that in the years since this, there have been more stories featuring him that have expanded upon his origin and explained more about exactly what he is, why he is the way he is. But you don't get any of that in here whatsoever. He's just a hugely powerful creature. He turns up in these early issues. He starts fighting this Justice League team, which is made up of kind of fairly obscure DC characters. It's not really the classic Justice League lineup you'd think of. So he turns up and he just starts causing havoc. He's rampaging and destroying everything in his path. This Justice League team comes up against him. He obliterates them, just wipes the floor with them completely. And then finally Superman kind of hears about what's going on and he goes over, and thus starts the huge fight. And I mean, it is a huge fight. It spans over quite a few issues and a huge distance within the story as well. So they're literally punching and throwing each other. I don't know, they must cover miles of ground, because they start off fighting in some small town and they end up fighting all the way to Metropolis, which is where the big showdown ultimately takes place. But that's really what this is. You know, you're getting a huge long fight initially, so it's very much just pretty much pure action. And then most of what you're seeing other than that is kind of reaction from other characters in the world to this fight. You know, you got the news story spreading that Superman's taking on this creature, this powerful thing that's pushing him to the limit. In this story, you have a version of Lex Luthor and Supergirl. They're kind of dating, and it's a little bit weird. Even though it's not the original Supergirl, it's not Kara Zor-El, it's not Superman's cousin, it's the Matrix Supergirl, which is effectively just an alien blob that can shapeshift, and it's taken the form of Supergirl during this time. Weird stuff, to be honest. And then Lex Luthor, speaking of weird stuff, he had previously died, I think, and he's kind of put his mind into a younger body, I think, and he's trying to pretend that he's his own son, and everybody thinks it's his son. It's kind of crazy, but yeah, that's what's going on with that. And I mention it because they show up pretty frequently during this overall story arc. And even though, I tell you, even though it's not the actual Supergirl, I just find it a little bit creepy every time I read this and I see the two of them kind of together. It's just weird. But anyway, so back to it. Doomsday here. You know, you start to get these kind of huge splash pages and double page spreads. Art here by, I think it's pronounced John Bogdanove. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. It's certainly a big dramatic action sequence. If you like your huge superhero fight sequences, then I'm sure you'd enjoy this. Here's where the Supergirl goes out and tries to help Superman, only to get punched in the face, and yeah, she kind of reverts form. She gets smacked so hard she turns back into her actual form. Yeah, because Doomsday's just on another level. I mean, he's on par with Superman, possibly even slightly stronger than Superman. And then here we get issue 75 of Superman, the classic issue itself, the big one, the big Death of Superman issue. This is a really cool issue in terms of the artwork. We've got Dan Jurgens and Brett Breeding collaborating on the art. And it's mostly splash pages, very dramatic, very cool. You get Clark and Lois sharing a final moment there before he springs into action. You know, he's kind of saying, I've got to do what I can to stop this guy, even if it kills me. And that is pretty much how it goes. They're just exchanging blow after blow, just smacking each other so hard that the windows in the buildings are smashing. Yeah, it's crazy stuff, really. And then it all ends here with this dramatic page, which is really cool about this edition. Hopefully they keep this feature in the next reprint. You get the original fold-out page featuring Lois and Superman's body. She mourns him. Very sad, very cool that they included that. Previous versions of this book had not included that fold-out page. So it was great when they restored it and put it into this one. And that's your Death of Superman. It's really quite a simple story, and it's only a small part of this omnibus overall. There's a lot of pages left. So really all that is, it's pretty much just as simple as Doomsday shows up, powerful alien, gets into a long fight with Superman, and they end up smacking each other so hard that they are both seemingly dead. And then what you get for quite a while after that, at this point, is the reaction to the dramatic news within the DC universe that Superman, the ultimate hero, the ultimate force for good, and the seemingly unstoppable, guy that he was, nobody ever really imagined that this would come to pass, that he would be dead, that there'd be a world without Superman. So it's a big deal. And I mean, this was a big deal in the real world even, It was on the news at the time on some places to actually say that, this long-standing superhero character has been killed off in the comics, and yeah, crazy stuff. And then you go into Funeral for a Friend, and this arc lasts quite a while. I think it's 9 or 10 issues. And, well, as you might expect, it's all about, ultimately, the funeral of Superman. It's kind of what I've said already. It's a lot of the characters who knew him to various extents, all reacting to the news. I'll just say as well, because you may notice I'm holding this book open to read through this bit. The binding is kind of pretty standard for a DC Omnibus. It's very sturdy. It feels, it's held together well, but it's not particularly loose, I guess, the right word for it. It's just pretty tight. It wants to shut itself whenever you're close to the beginning or the back. It's not really a big deal. You just got to hold it open a little bit. As I say, that's pretty standard for a DC book, to be honest, especially a book of this size. It's not something I really complain about. It's what you expect going in. It's what you should expect going in anyway. Anyway, really cool homage cover there to Action Comics #1. Yeah, so as I say, it's a pretty drawn out, this bit, to be honest. It can be a little bit overly long, you could say. It's certainly goes on for a long time of characters just kind of mourning the death of Superman. Don't get me wrong, it's a pretty realistic reaction to what you'd expect to happen in this universe if something like this genuinely happened, but from a point of view of reading it, it does go on for quite a while. But at the same time, if they hadn't done this, if they had rushed this stuff and skimmed through the whole reaction to his death, then you'd have people criticising the fact that it wasn't shown to have enough impact. So overall, I think they did it the right way in making it last as long as it did, this whole funeral section. And then, as we move past the funeral for a friend a bit, well, there's all this bit that turns out Superman's body has been recovered by, I can't remember who these guys are exactly, a secret organisation. It's been a while since I read this now. I've read this omnibus through a couple of times, but even so, as I say, when you're talking about an event of this size, and it really is an event, it's not a story, it's a huge event, really. Yeah, there's just so many kind of little details here and there that very easy to forget if you haven't read it recently, or at least I find it is. So, yeah, that's why I'm going to have to skim over some of the things, to be honest. But basically, in the aftermath of this whole funeral section, you get the emergence of the new Supermen, really, which we'll get to in a moment, I'm sure. But this version of Lex, so the thing about him is at this time, because he's masquerading as his own son, when in fact he is the real Lex Luthor, he's transferred his mind into a younger version of his own body. So everybody kind of thinks he's this good guy, this great philanthropist, but of course he's still himself, so he's trying to, I guess, just continue his usual kind of shady operations, the dodgy things that he gets up to, whilst trying to also convince this Matrix Supergirl that he's a good guy. And yeah, it's pretty weird stuff, to be honest. It's not the best part of the whole story. I don't know, I just don't like seeing the relationship, it's weird. This is a pretty cool issue, if it's the issue I think it is. I'm pretty sure it is. Adventures of Superman 11. So this is where Pa Kent has had a heart attack, he's in hospital, and it's touch and go as to whether or not he's going to make it. And he has this kind of out-of-body experience where he's fighting in, Vietnam, and he kind of meets up with Clark, with his son, ultimately. And it's this whole kind of thing, like deliberately kind of ambiguous. Like, is it real? Is it just in his head? You know, as he's kind of approaching death. But yeah, so he meets his son here, and he's like trying to convince him to come back with him. And in the end, he kind of does. So it's kind of weird because it's just a strange story. It's cool, but it's strange. So like, he comes back, Jonathan Kent comes back to life, and he thinks that he's brought Clark back. And at exactly this time, or like right after this has happened, this is where the other Supermen start to appear. Starting with this guy, who I'm going to call for now Visor Superman, because he wears this yellow visor every time he's seen. And you get this Superboy turning up. At the same time, you get the cyborg Superman turning up, and a guy called John Henry Irons, who adopts the name Steel as he wears a huge metallic Superman suit. It's kind of like Iron Man style stuff. So you have these four characters running around, and it's quickly established that Steel is not the real Superman, and you know that Superboy is not the real Superman. The question mark is set up to be hanging over the other two. So the Visor Superman and the Cyborg Superman. Which of them, if either of them, is the real one? This is Steel. Very kind of over the top classic 90s style costume, gotta love it. Yeah, so these two then, the Visor Superman and the Cyborg Superman, both turn up and seemingly possess some of Clark Kent's memories, some of his personality, but neither of them quite seem right. And the idea, you know, for example, Lois Lane, she meets them both and she's thinking to herself, well, could it be that it's the real Superman? Because they do seem to know her. For example, you see this conversation here between the Cyborg and Lois, and effectively just talking about, well, death changed me, you know, I'm different. Doomsday gets launched into space, but he's laughing the whole time, so, you know, clearly alive, clearly going to come back again at some point. Superboy, at the same time, he's being kind of promoted as the official Superman, but he's just this arrogant, egotistical kid, you know, initially. This is the interesting bit. I think this is my favourite part of the story, probably, is when you have all these other Superman going around, and the story's still dealing with the legacy of Superman and the loss that his death has created. But at the same time, it's not purely about that, because you've got these new guys roaming around and they're all doing what they're doing, and other characters are trying to figure out exactly what the deal is with each of them. You know, for example, right here. So yeah, it's all interesting. And then ultimately, to probably not many people's surprise at the time, the evil-looking cyborg turns out to be evil. And the other one, the Visor Superman, turns out to be, I think it's called the Eradicator, which was this Kryptonian weapon or something. I can't remember, to be honest, guys, but something anyway. He's not the real Superman. But yeah, so Cyborg turns out to be the main villain. And I'll tell you, as you flick through this book, as I'm doing so now, it really just strikes you about how long this story really is, you know. I mean, I'm flicking through this what feels like really quickly, and yet it's still, you know, not a quick thing to just kind of summarize as you go through it. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to read it, definitely do be prepared for the fact that it's a pretty long read. And there probably will be parts of it that you feel are less relevant to the overall story than other bits. But yeah, so Visor Superman, he wears the visor because light is too bright for him. So like it hurts his eyes. Steel is kind of taking on street level crime. He's taking on these gangs that were using these futuristic weapons. He's a pretty cool character. Visor Superman's just kind of he's got like a merciless approach to crime fighting, you know, like he doesn't just stop criminals, he like hurts them seriously, like he just doesn't have any kind of compassion whatsoever. So, you know, that's a giveaway that he's not the real Superman. Yeah, so then you move into Reign of the Supermen. And this is all where the Cyborg ends up revealing that he's the main villain. And his whole plan, basically, is that he was going to take the image of Superman, specifically, to tarnish his legacy. That's his idea. So he's going to do some evil stuff, try and make it so that everybody thinks that Superman did it. So you see here he's captured Superboy. He starts to build this massive kind of fortress. What ends up happening is Coast City, which is home of Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, gets obliterated. So that was a pretty major thing that happened out of this story. So Cyborg Superman just kind of nukes the whole place, wrecks it, and on top of it builds this huge kind of industrial looking fortress. And right about now is, yeah, where Superman himself comes back. The real deal comes back as this in this black suit with the silver emblem. And I'll tell you that the explanation for where he's been and how he's back is well, it's not great, but it's like a classic example, I think, of writers kind of putting themselves into a corner where they killed him off, and that's all well and good. That they got the shock that they wanted. You know, the big reaction from everybody, like, oh my God, they killed Superman. But in terms of then, the question was, okay, so how do we bring him back? Well, you're going to have to do some comic book nonsense, because obviously for him to come back, he can't really be dead. And the idea was that he was just mostly dead, you know. And there's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead. He was still slightly alive. So yeah, he was just in this kind of pod, and he was recharging. So during the events of all that stuff with the other Supermen, he was just slowly recharging, and then he ends up coming back. But initially he's quite weak. He doesn't have all his powers back yet, so he can't fly. He has these guns that he's kind of carrying around, as you see here. Again, more classic 90s, just this black suit Superman with ammo strapped around his shoulders and two huge guns. Doesn't get a lot more 90s than that. But yeah, so they're all launching assaults. So Superman goes with Superboy and Steel, and Green Lantern gets involved, and they launch an assault onto the Cyborg's fortress, really, and take him on. Superman gets his powers back through more vague comic book stuff. Again, just to do another comparison, it's a lot like Nightfall, where Bruce Wayne was just sort of magically healed through some random superpowers. Similarly, something happens here that's just kind of, you just have to kind of roll with it and just be like, right, okay, yeah, sure, that gave him his powers back, okay. Yeah, so ultimately, that's how it goes down, and then there's a big showdown in the end, Superman and the Cyborg. It's just beautifully 90s excessive. Getting to the point at the end of the book where the glue in the spine's starting to crack and you got to hold it open. And then you finally get the ultimate return of Superman, back in the main costume, still got a mullet, just to keep that 90s theme going strong. Yeah, so then he comes back, reunites with Lois. It's a very sweet moment. He has to try and explain why Clark Kent is suddenly going to come back at the same time that Superman comes back. So he uses a little help from the Matrix, Supergirl. She shapeshifts into Clark or into Superman, I can't remember, so that they can be seen together and nobody thinks that they're the same person. Fun stuff. And yeah, so then it's kind of like the very end of the book, you get a couple of little stories of Clark back as Superman, kind of getting back into the groove of just saving the day in typical ways. Oh yeah, I think right at the end, I think he meets Azrael. Yeah, it's a little bit, because this Superman's now returned at the same time as Azrael's going around as Batman over in the Batman series. So they have a brief meeting and he kind of realizes that's not the right Batman, but that doesn't really go anywhere. You'd think it would actually, but it doesn't. And then the Justice League destroy Cyborg Superman's base in the end here. They're going to blow it up. I think they sink it into the sea. That's kind of like the last remnants of everything sort of dealt with, and then you get a bonus section in the back with a few kind of interviews, some bonus bits of artwork, covers and posters, etc. I think these are t-shirt designs actually, pretty cool. And some sketches. That's the same image that's used on the actual hardcover, the wraparound. And more of those newspaper bookend pages. So yeah, another kind of long review there, pretty much unavoidable to be honest if you're going to talk about this book in any detail. So thank you very much if you stuck with me through that. I hope that it was of some interest to see the book, and if you are thinking of picking it up, maybe that's swayed the decision one way or another. Let me know what you think of it though, either this omnibus, whether or not you're thinking of getting the reprint, or just what you think of this story. Certainly I would have to say it's maybe a bit too bloated, you know, for most people. It's, unless you're a huge Superman fan, but even then, considering that the majority of the story doesn't actually feature the real Superman, I think more than anything you have to just have some kind of fondness for, or just ability to enjoy long 90s comic events, because this is certainly one of those. It won't be for everybody, and to be honest I can understand it if it's not something that you enjoy yourself, but I can have a bit of fun with it. You know, it's an omnibus I'm happy to have. It's certainly a classic piece of comic book history preserved in a great omnibus edition here. And yeah, as I say, I've read through it a couple of times, so every now and then I can pick it up, and if you just want to read something that is kind of just a fun read, doesn't require huge amounts of thinking really to enjoy it, it's just good fun. I think that's the simplest way to describe it overall, and there's nothing really wrong with that at the end of the day for me. So hopefully, as I say, yeah, that was something worth watching, and yeah, hopefully I'll be back again soon. I'll talk to you again, guys, feature another book review.